Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I am a comic book artist, writer, creator, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you enjoy these live streams, would like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month where we do deep dives into some of the best art books around, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. In addition to the bonus live streams, you get access to a Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share shop talk, tips and tricks, feedback. We share our artwork with each other, share all sorts of creative resources, and there are higher tiers for higher rewards, but $2 a month is the basic to get you in. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, if you'd like to get work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Comixology or Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It's a standalone psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. Or you can pick up my most recent project, Morningstar. Morningstar tells the story of Lucifer's fall from heaven as a Western. It's an 8-issue comic book series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2, the conclusion, contains issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter, character designs, script excerpts, thumbnails, page layouts, and more. I basically show you how I put the entire book together. And if you go to the homepage of my YouTube channel, there's book flip throughs of each of these books, so you can see what's inside before you buy. All right. And with that, let's get into some artwork. See Byron's in the chat. How you doing, Byron? Good to see you, man. So this past week was a very poor week for productivity. I didn't make any progress on this piece at all. So we're picking up right where we left off last week, which was me finishing the sky and now moving into, I think I'm going to do the ground next, because the cliff walls, the sides of the environment are going to be the areas that are going to have the least amount of detail, because that's going to be the most in shadow. It's getting the least amount of light. Pardon me. I think I feel a sneeze come down. Pardon me. All right. So let's see here. Got my clouds, got my sky, got my ground plane, and I am going to go ahead and create a clipping mask. I'm going to mask this next layer, this ground layer, to the ground plane that I've established. Got that there. So we'll just call this ground detail. I am a stickler for naming my layers. It's just a habit I've picked up from using Photoshop and digital programs for years. And let's clip that. Let's see here. Byron says, we all have those weeks, and says, bless you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So let's see here. So I'm going back to my my reference thumbnail. I just have this layer on top to turn on and off. Sometimes just go back and look for inspiration. Just to see if there's anything in here detail-wise that jumps out at me. Because what I'm going for on this layer really is just some energy cracks. And I think I'm going to just go right in with a very bright blue color. me switch to my preferred sketching brush. All right. So what I wanted to communicate or imply, and I should probably turn the frame back on so I can get a sense of what's going to actually make it into the piece, because you're really not going to see a lot with this frame in the background, but the idea is that the ground is sort of cracking underneath Lucifer's feet. And as you go further into the background, you're not going to see a lot of it because of how little of the ground is really going to show up in the final image. The idea is that the normal cracked earth that you might see from a dry desert bed is what most of the ground is going to look like. But as it approaches Lucifer, some of those cracks are going to have light leaking through them. And the advantage of having these perspective grids in there is that it just reminds me to not go willy-nilly, because it's really easy when you're doing something like this to just fall into the pleasure of putting cool energy marks just going all over the place. And this is sort of a reminder to me to try and remember the sense of the ground plane. This is also something when I was taking perspective classes with John Messer at the Animation Guild. You know, he showed us that even when you're looking up at the sky, you can put the sky plane at various places depending on the angle that you're looking up. But the sky to itself has a same as there's a ground plane, there's a sky plane, like a ceiling above you. And that's why I had these perspective lines on, these guidelines while I was drawing the clouds, to kind of remind me the same thing. That's like I'm layering these things, like I'm sitting the clouds on a surface. So let's see here. I see John on Twitch says that looks sick. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Try to find a balance here. Sometimes, you know, when you're working on a piece, it's like you zoom in, but I try to usually work zoomed out. On this piece, on this particular area here, because it's like a tiny little detail in the background, I'm probably closer than I normally would be. In fact, a lot of times when I'm just generally starting on a piece and I'm just kind of getting into the details, where I don't really want to get the details locked in too much at the start, I'm actually work like even zoomed out from where you guys would be watching. So I'll have it kind of small in the middle of my screen. And it's almost like I will start working on the piece like it's a thumbnail when I'm working on a finished piece, and still try to keep the details to a minimum until I get farther in. In fact, I think I'm just going to have this join that crack right there. Take some of these, make them a little bit larger in the foreground. So this frame constitutes what's going to actually be on the cover of the comic. But I'm still trying to use the template that I use for 11 by 14 illustrations, for 11 by 14 art prints. So there will be a little bit of detail in here that's not going to make it into the final piece. Or at least it'll be cropped out of the final piece, I should say. Been thinking about the fact that in recent years been working slower and slower and more cautiously. And I think part of that is having a better sense of what I do and don't want in a piece and trying to take the time necessary to craft an image that I'm going to be happy with. But I think part of it is also that to a certain degree, for as long as I've been making art, I still maybe don't really trust myself. There's a certain degree of just jumping in and taking a leap of faith when you make any creative work. And I think that I am real hesitant to really, really just dive in with abandon and not worry about, trusting myself that no matter what happens, I'll figure it out, because I still do pieces where I get pretty far along and be like, oh, nope, that wasn't it. I need to start over. I did not figure out all the things I needed to figure out. And I think that artists go through seasons. We go through seasons where we're like, I got this, no matter what, it's going to come out okay. I'll figure out the answers. And then we also go through seasons where everything sucks and you're just not happy no matter what you do. I'm blathering on about this because I'm thinking that I'm trying to work through a transitional phase. I'm working my way out of a not trusting myself phase and hopefully back towards a phase of whatever it is, I will figure it out. I mean, this bunch of energy patterns I've got in here, this alone is an example of not being sure, well, it's an example of diving right in without having everything worked out, because ordinarily the way I tend to work, I would work from dark to light. So I would work out all of the rest of the rocks and earth and ground plane first, and then put the energy on last. But in this case, I'm thinking I don't plan on having that much detail in the rocks anyway. So it's like, why get too wrapped up in that? In fact, let me put another layer on here, and I'm going to put this one underneath the ground detail, and we're just going to go maybe a shade darker than the ground plane. Or actually, you know what? Screw it. We already got these values here. let's take that next value that makes up the cliff walls. I'm going to use that to paint in some of the cracks. Byron says confidence is only for the things you're used to. If you're getting better, you're naturally going to be doing things you aren't used to, even if they seem on the surface similar. You know what? That is an excellent point. I can't remember who it was who said it, but there's a great inspirational quote that's just, if you're not failing, you're not reaching far enough. And I'm not saying that I'm failing here. I'm saying more that I'm reaching out. I'm constantly feel like I'm trying to reach outside of my comfort zone. Which again, I think is a good thing for creatives to do. So at this point, drawing these rocks on the ground, these cracks in the earth, this is almost like as if you were drawing water on the ground. Like I'm just think of it as just a pattern. And to be honest, I could probably just find a cracked earth texture and then just drop that in and perspective warp it to the ground and erase what I don't need. And come out here and sort of create an outside edge to some of these cracks. So this layers underneath the blue energy. And for stuff like this, I always feel like the challenge is adding enough detail that it feels like it is genuinely part of the world that the illustration is creating, but not so much detail that the eye is overwhelmed and it starts to feel cluttered. And this stuff is always a battle between those two balances, those two poles. And if anything, I tend to err on the side of under detailing. Over detailing, under detailing it, that really is just one of those things where it's like everyone's got a personal tendency. It's like some people who tend to make legs too long, some people tend to make them too short. People who can draw things out of their head but struggle with realism, and people who can like look at something and copy it like a photograph. but struggle to imagine work, imagine images. We're all wired differently creatively, have our different instincts and default settings. Can hear my wife in the other room trying to calm down one of our cats who's freaking out just because she wants to have a freak out. Those two do get nutty. Once in a while, I gotta turn that frame back on just to make sure that there is going to be some detail that actually is going to show up on the cover. Because there's a danger here of that mistake of putting a lot of detail in something that, if you're doing a comic book, would just be covered up by the lettering. And it's like, well, why did I bother drawing that detailed ass background? No one's going to see it. Knowing that I'm probably going to make a print of this, I'm trying to make sure that areas that aren't going to be seen in the cover still have enough detail that in the print it feels like a finished illustration and not like it just has these big blank areas. You know, for that, I should actually probably go back to my Frank Frazetta art books, because, you know, a lot of his work were fantasy novel covers. And he had to leave room for ad copy, for the book title and author name and whatever else they want to throw on the front. And again, it's wanting to have detail, but not distraction. I don't want to put so much in here that you're like, I can't tell where to look. I don't know what's going on. I mean, you're supposed to be looking at the figure. And by doing the background first, hopefully it's like I can get in like what I feel feels kind of finished to me, and then just not think about the background anymore. Just let it fall away. And really put the focus on the figurative work. Yeah, doing the background first is kind of like me eating my vegetables. Although I feel like I should definitely get into the habit of going out and doing some plein air painting and really develop the skill of drawing environments and landscapes for the sake of themselves. So now at this point, I know that whatever I put in the background is not going to show up, which means anything else that I have to add to the background is just for the print. So I'm going to turn this off now. And it's like, all right, now it's just a matter of what needs to be filled in so that this doesn't feel weird. Because it would seem weird to have all this detail on the bottom and then just all this wide empty space back here. So one of the things I want to do now is try and sort of divvy up the space to give you that sense of receding planes. So I'm going to take this area and sort of divide it like this, and then say, all right, take another section and make it a little bit smaller. And then one smaller than that, and then just maybe bring the brush size down a little bit. So I'm trying to do is get a sense of a zigzagging of ground going back into the distance. So now it's not about the individual cracks that we're seeing in the front and the foreground. Now it's really becoming little bits. Now it's the land as a whole. I'm also trying to be wary of creating tangents where it touches the figure. And if I really want to toss things up and give a little bit more feel, I might actually go with a slightly lighter tone and put some little areas, little patches of light in the foreground, and maybe in the deep space of the background. But from here, now it's just almost like zigzag lines, very thin, just to indicate space moving backwards. Space receding, that's the word that I meant to say. It doesn't need to be super detailed. In fact, it should not be super detailed. So let's see what happens if I come in here and pick a color that is just the tiniest bit brighter. Than that ground plane. That's not quite enough. Let's go just a hair brighter. So again, this is just trying to add a little bit more, I don't know, zhuzh, for lack of a better term. A little bit of brighter area, just almost like I want to think that they're rocks that are facing, not just angled up, maybe up and towards the sky, and catching a little bit of sunlight, a little bit of that dawn creeping over into the frame. It's very abstract. It's not super specific. See my boy Amar in the chat. Says, hello, Jeremy. Been looking in the background. Always good to see you, man. Always good to see you. Yeah, just trying to make some progress on this this cover. I didn't get any chance to do artwork at all this past week. Well, other than work for my figure drawing class. So now I'm just picking up where I was last week. Although I think I made a fair amount of progress just in this this short bit right here. I spent an entire live stream last time painting sky. Now I'm spending it painting earth. And then soon we will get to the figure work. All right, I think that's probably about enough here. Put the brush size back up just a little bit so I can put a couple more. Just dots, just little specks of light. And trying to keep them sort of in the foreground. So it's like the light, like almost as if everything gets a little bit dark right around where the figure of Lucifer is going to really start coming up, like with the sky wrapping around him. The challenge of this piece is that there's constantly a level of modulating, adjusting the levels of both value and color temperature. Trying to put warms against cools, lights against darks to kind of move the eye through. Amar says next will be fire. And he says, sorry, think about earth, wind, fire. Turn this back off again. And now I just sort of want to make sure that this light fading out here, and by light, I mean these little specks of lighter color, that they are transitioning into the deeper background, just adding a few smaller ones in the distance. So it's not like an abrupt stop. We kind of help guide the eye gently into the background. And then right here near the horizon, I almost feel like there should be a little bit more, like now it's catching that sunlight. But I'm also afraid that's going to fight too much with the figure, so. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to those energy bolts. And let me alpha lock this so the lines will have to stay inside of what I paint. And I'm going to go not quite too white, but I'm going to take the blue color I've got here and I'm going to push this to an even brighter color and try to give that sense that there is some light. As a matter of fact, let's drop the opacity just a little bit so I can get a little bit of that transition of light sort of bleeding through there. Yeah, now let's go the full opacity. Just that sense that there's not just energy, but that there's a bright pulsing almost coming through. Again, turning the frame back on so that I can see if there's places where it's not even going to show up. Okay. That's probably enough there. Now, for the cliff walls, I almost feel like it really just needs to be two tones because it's already shadow and then I guess darker shadow. So what I'm going to try and do is paint in the areas of the cliff wall that are leaning towards us or angled towards the viewer a little bit darker than this, and then leave the base color to be the light that is angled towards the sky. And I'll still have to probably put a little bit of light on top of that, painting a little bit of the warm colors bleeding into this. But I think I'm going to save that once I get everything blocked in. I'll probably do a whole pass for like the sky bleeding onto the figure, bleeding onto the background. So I can kind of modulate that because there's places where it could get messy. So let's see here. I'm going to take both of these layers that are the ground detail, and I'm just going to combine them. And we're going to do mountain detail. So it's just a matter of picking a color that isn't so dark that I'm losing, that it's going to make everything muddy, but dark enough that it'll be a good contrast. So I'm slightly desaturating and darkening, and I'm using the fact that the color wheel shows me the color I started with versus the current color I have selected to kind of help find a balance, a color that's just dark enough that it should give me a separate tone. Yeah, I think that'll work. Because in this level, what I really want, it's not like I want the same level of contrast that you get between the light and the dark. now we're in the dark. So I want a shadow that stays within the shadow family. And I'm choosing to not make that shadow family. I'm choosing not to make that shadow family super dark. And again, let me clip this so I don't really have to worry about staying within the frame here. In fact, this is one of those where big swaths of detail I kind of will almost pull out and look at it almost like a thumbnail. This is a place where I want to let the overall lack of detail kind of lead, not get in here and paint too much, get too fixated. The ground, to me, it makes sense for the ground to have more detail because the ground is facing up, meaning it's receiving more light, whereas these walls are not receiving the light coming directly above the sky, nor are they receiving the light that's creeping over the horizon. And you can't have detail without light. And that's something that took me a long time to figure out about painting. Detail exists where there's light. It doesn't mean there's no detail in the shadows at all, but the details tend to be much more constricted, which almost makes me wish I had spent more time studying photography, because I feel like these are things that photographers know instinctually by the fact of needing to have to either capture light or having to light the subject. You develop an inherent instinctual understanding of how light and detail are related. But when you spend a lot of time drawing, and not necessarily observational drawing, but for me, most of my drawing experience was drawing things out of my head, out of my imagination. It wasn't even until like my mid to late 20s when I started going to figure drawing classes regularly and really starting to draw observationally, drawing from models, drawing from setups. And that's sort of where I began to start understanding these things about how light and detail are intrinsically linked. And as we get down here towards the bottom, I see it makes a lot more sense for me to just go and cut. So it goes all the way to black at the bottom. There's going to be areas receiving the least amount of light. I don't need to put really any detail at all in those areas. Yeah, this really doesn't need much. I feel like what I just painted in there is enough. I mean, part of me wants to go in and sort of soften that transition between the ground plane and the rocks. Have more of that kind of cut in. Go back to this layer. See what happens if I come in here and give this a little bit more. Oop, now the brush is way too big. Nah, it's too small. Get my Goldilocks on. See, that was something I didn't necessarily even think about. Like, I really expected, as I was drawing this, these are just the little things that's like, oh, just one little thing that should have been obvious. I really expected to get a bunch of lost edges along this ridge here, because I was thinking my shadow color for the walls is going to bleed into the shadows that I have on the ground plane. But I forgot about the fact that I was going to come in with a darker color because I hadn't really decided how I was going to approach it. But having come in and made the walls very dark at the base now leaves sort of a hard edge as opposed to a lost edge. So who knows? Maybe I should go in there with a little bit of the shadow color of the wall as well on this ground plane. Now I'm getting to that territory where I kind of have to watch myself because I'm getting a little bit too caught up in painting more detail in versus less. But I'm also trying not to think of it as detail so much as I'm just thinking of it as areas facing away from the light and areas facing towards the light. All right, I'm going to grab some of this dark shadow color and paint that in. Just see if it breaks anything. You know what? All it does, I think, is it reinforces that this is a hard transition as opposed to coming in with the shadow color that's at the top of the wall. That makes this feel like it's a more gradual transition. Yeah, all right. I think that is enough. So, hell, let's do some figure work. So let's start with just a base. Maybe a neutral gray here. So I think instead of doing the way I've done it in the past, where I sit there and I try to draw the entire silhouette, and then I have to try and search for all of the places where there are little gaps to do the as I do the paint bucket, which Procreate calls color drop, but it's the paint bucket. Instead, I think what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go, okay, here's the boot, fill it, and then move to another part and then fill it. And that just saves me sort of that hunting and pecking, trying to find all the places. Because if I just try to use the auto select, where you just select everything that isn't the line art, there are so many places where I'll leave like a little gap in the figure, like especially in the wings here. Like there's places where the wings don't there isn't a specific silhouette all around the figure. If you look at the top of his hat, little open lines there, and usually that's to indicate light. As a form is coming towards an area that's going to be hitting light, I will tend to leave little gaps and openings and have the lines get thinner. Or for instance, like I don't want the lines of the wings to interfere with the silhouette or shape of the gun. So I'll leave a gap there as opposed to having that line go all the way and connect. And I can also see that if I were to connect that line, it would make a tangent. I want this line hitting the place where it's going. I don't want the tangent. So I just have the line stop before it reaches the figure. But it's little things like that that make it not useful for me to do like a paint bucket selection or a magic wand selection. So instead, I'm just going through and doing a section at a time. So now I can kind of go over here and see, right? Thigh. And it seems like I pretty much got it all. And I'll just move through this until I have the whole figure of the silhouette done, and then I can just start painting in the figure. So from here on out, it's just figure work and then adding a little bit of lighting polish. To be honest, I almost kind of wonder if I should be a little bit sloppier with this and not trying not to color within the lines. You give myself a little bit of space for this to be a little bit more organic, a little bit more painterly. And hell, that boot is small enough. I don't even really need the paint bucket. Just paint it and fill it. Just not paint, but just fill in the colors as I draw. So now I'm moving up into the torso. Now this is going to be tricky because I'm going to have to come in here and carve all of this up to separate the pants from the snake, from the gun, the boots. The wings. Although the nice thing is once I have the overall figure silhouetted, from there I can use save selection, so I can actually just paint base flat colors with the selections. Like I select the entire figure and then I cut out just everything but the wings, then save that as a selection. So as opposed to having flats, which are more efficient, but Procreate doesn't have, well, the what I mean is that you could paint flats, but their ability to select from them is not as good as, say, Photoshop. But I can just save those selections. And those selections essentially become my flats. And I could go through and do this with the selection tool and just select the entire silhouette, like dot, 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 all the way around the whole figure. But there's something very soothing about coming in here and doing this by hand. Almost like it's a warm up for the actual figurative painting. I've tried doing this both ways. I've done this where I sit down and I do the dot selections all the way around the entire figure. And I don't think that one way is necessarily better than the other. Well, actually, no, I think that in terms of wear and tear on your hands, using the selection tool as opposed to painting this is probably better for your hand. Um, but like I said, this is also kind of soothing for me. So I'm choosing relaxation over efficiency. Now from here, I can just go up and let's see if this works. Yeah, there we go. Pow. I thought that because I was going off of the edge and didn't draw a frame around the edge of the screen, it might go outside of the selection area that I wanted. But nope, handled it just fine. Now from here, I can go up, fill in the wing. Make the brush size a little bit larger because I don't have any opacity sensitivity turned on right now, but I have size sensitivity, pressure sensitivity turned on. So it allows me to use less pressure, or actually, I have to use less pressure to get a smaller line. And what that does is that's easier on my hand. I'm not pressing on the screen as hard. So when I'm doing these smaller areas, or even areas that are maybe a little bit larger, I can just kind of glide my hand across the screen as opposed to really bearing down on the tablet, which I don't know about you guys, but for me, the whole weight pressing down on the screen is a problem. I've forced myself to develop a lighter, more delicate touch. And I think that has actually saved me a lot of hand problems. And I think if I continued to be as heavy handed as I was when I was a younger artist, I would probably be drawing with. I mean, I've still had times when I've had to put on a hand brace. But the idea of being able to just glide my hand across the tablet is much more soothing and less damaging, it feels to me, than bearing down, being heavy handed. Let's see here. Amar says path selection was even more tedious when doing it in Photoshop or Illustrator. Well, you know, the thing I have found is that the tolerance settings in Photoshop were better. So if you tried to select something that had broken lines and it's selecting everything inside, you're like, well, let me drop the tolerance from 32 down to 15. Let me drop from 15 down to like 10 or 8. And then you could get it to the point where even if there were breaks in the lines, you could dial it in just right, that it would just fill the things that you wanted. So that is the advantage, the upside that Photoshop had. But yeah, in terms of just generally, I think any program where you're going in there and you're just trying to do a flood or a paint bucket command and it's not completely filled in like a perfectly drawn silhouette with no breaks, you're going to have that refinement issue. I mean, like I said, Procreate has that issue as well. It doesn't feel to me like Procreate is better at that than this. I think also a large part of it is back when I used to do work, when I was doing comic work in Photoshop, it never occurred to me to just paint parts of the silhouette and then paint bucket bit by bit. This is something that only occurred to me as working in well, not necessarily in working in Procreate, because it really came out of doing graphic design work for my day job. There'd be times when I would find it really super tedious, like you said, the marching ants. You have to select and mask out a photo. How that would get very, very tedious to do the whole photo. And what I started doing is I would just make a selection for like the wing and make sure that selection is complete. Because the whole thing, if you're trying to mask the entire thing and you mess up, then your whole selection is screwed and you have to start all over again. So what I would do is I would just mask out one piece, like one section of it, a face or a head, and then say, all right, that's done. Then add to that selection. So each one is like it's getting added in steps, because if I screw up somewhere along the line, I can just hit undo a few times and go back to whatever I had before. I don't have to start all over again. And that from graphic design and working in photos has eventually poured over to my comic work, in that trying to draw a perfect silhouette or trying to make a perfect outline selection. Let's see right there. Somewhere in here, there is it's because I didn't go all the way up. I was zoomed in too much. Now it should work fine. But the idea of, instead of trying to execute a perfect outline, perfect silhouette all in one go, to just do it in little chunks and fill in the chunks as I go, it gives me space to undo. That's really all I want, is just space to undo. I don't have to nail it perfectly on that first pass. That's interesting. Byron says, I'm a weirdo. I'm only heavy-handed when I write. While I draw, I have an extremely delicate hand. I don't know why. I'm curious when you type if you're one of those people who pounds the keys and mashes, because maybe there's something about getting the words out that whether it's writing longhand or typing that you just because I mean, when it comes to the opposite, being heavy-handed, I know some people who it's almost like they're carving into the paper or the Bristol board, and you can actually, when you look at their work, you can see grooves in the line. And I'm almost like, dude, you should just switch to drawing in ink. I mean, for me, part of how I learned not to be heavy-handed, figure drawing classes helped a lot because I was working with charcoal pencil, and charcoal pencils, if you press, first off, charcoal pencils are a lot darker. So the minute you put a line down, you're like, ooh, I didn't want that to be that dark or that broad. And you have to learn to lighten up your touch. And then two, if you press too hard, they're just going to snap because charcoal pencils are more delicate than graphite. And between those two things, it just trained me to use a lighter hand. Let's see here. Amar says, I used quick mask or channels before they had layer masks, so I got used to it. Because I had to do it with color cellophane in keyline paste up days. Damn. See, that's the thing. I never had to do paste up. So that's, you did the old school design. I think when I first started doing graphic design work, Photoshop was on either Photoshop. It wasn't on Photoshop 2. It was Photoshop 4. I think Photoshop 3 was out. And then they just, I think I started doing my first graphic design job was at my school newspaper. And I think we had upgraded. We were at Photoshop 3 and they eventually upgraded the school to Photoshop 4. And the design studio that I was at had Photoshop 4. So yeah, those were the early days. Like back before, like I remember before Macromedia even existed. And then I remember when it came out and then you had Fireworks and Dreamweaver and all those other programs trying to compete with Photoshop being purely based at like the beginning before even Web 1.0 or during Web 1.0. And the rise of Flash. Let's see here. Yeah, Amar says the computer made it a lot easier. Byron says, yeah, you might be onto something. Well, you know what? Even a broken clock is right twice a day. Okay, guys. So I think we made a lot of progress here. We've got the background pretty much filled in. We have this thing ready for figure work. We'll see how this week goes. I still have a lot of things in my life that I'm trying to catch up on. So we may be back here next week and be picking up right from here. Maybe I'll have a chance to get a little bit of figure work done over the week. We shall see. But regardless, I appreciate you guys hanging out. And I appreciate you guys being here, sitting side by side and making some good conversation while we're making some art progress. So I hope you guys are productive with all the things that you're working on, your various projects. And in the meantime, if you would like to get bonus live streams twice a month, and these live streams aren't just the hour-long sessions here. They are 2.5, 3-hour-long sessions. And we also have a voice channel open on Discord during our Patreon live streams. So you guys not just chat, text-wise, we can actually talk back and forth while we're drawing. All that for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share process, shop talk, give each other feedback, and more. You get access to an online archive where you can read my comic books digitally. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. If you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, if you'd like to get work in progress animated gifts delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, if you read digitally on Comixology or Kindle, you go to amazon.jeremy.net. You can pick up books Like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods, it is a standalone. It's a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can also pick up my most recent comic book series, Morning Star. It is Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter, page layouts, script excerpts, thumbnails, photo reference, and more. I basically guide you through how I put the entire comic book together. And if you go to the homepage of my YouTube channel, you can check out book flip-throughs of all these books. You can see what's inside them before you buy. There's links for all these in the description of the video. For those watching on Twitch, there are links in the About Me tab. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me. Good times as always. That's it for now. Go be creative.